Wait a few, like just maybe one more minute if anyone wants to gather. But I'm a PhD student at the University of Michigan. I'm in the BLESH lab, which is the Soil and Agroecosystems lab, which is what I'll talk a little bit about in this presentation. And I'm a first-year PhD, so I'm still figuring out my research and stuff, but I'm going to talk a little bit about sustainable farming and how it can be done and why it's important. And I'll use some specific examples from around Ann Arbor because I grew up here, and I think farming is really important to Michigan, to the Midwest, and to the world. We all eat food. And so I'm excited to dive into that a little bit. So I'll just start by asking you guys, what do plants need to survive? I'm thinking of 3 things here, and if you want to shout anything out, yes? Water, yes, that's one of them. Any other ideas? So one of them is sunlight. Plants need sunlight to photosynthesize, to make their own sugars. And the third one is nutrients. So these are the 3 things. If you want to grow a crop or any plant, like these carrots, you got to think about these 3 things. And of these 3 things, farmers can manage their land to change these things, basically. And so what can farmers manage? They can definitely manage water, right? They can water their plants. They can definitely manage nutrients, right? Because they can add fertilizer in a bunch of different ways. But they can't really manage sunlight, right? The sun is going to be out or it's not going to be out. That's up to the sun. So what I focus on in my research is really how farmers manage water and nutrients. So in Michigan, we're lucky. We have a lot of fresh water, right? There's plenty of water to water these crops. So like my research is specifically focused on nutrients, but both of these things are important. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. If you didn't know, this is how most farmers, especially in the Midwest, get water and nutrients onto their croplands. So this is a big watering combine, basically rolls through these cornfields. These are baby corn plants right here, and waters those crops when they need it, when it's dry in the summer, if they're in a less rainy area. And this is industrial fertilizer. So these are just fertilizers that go on top of the soil, and when it rains, they get released into the soil, and the plants can take them up. But there are some problems here, because with this fertilizer, if it runs off into nearby watersheds, like we were talking about a little bit, it can make rivers and lakes pretty icky. And so as farmers and as scientists and as people who live in a water state, we have to be really careful to make sure that our fertilizers aren't running off too much. And in Michigan, we're lucky because we have a lot of water, but in some places, you really have to be careful with water too, right? If you think about in a desert, you know, if you don't have water, fresh water laying around, it can be really important to use the water you have really smartly. So while these are some ways that most farmers manage for water and nutrients, I'm really interested in using life in the soil. So this is something called the soil food web. Has anybody ever heard of the soil food web? It's kind of a rogue topic, but I'm really obsessed with it. The idea is that under the ground, there's so many organisms that are living and breathing and digesting things. And so these are just a few examples. And I know there's some big words up there, but this is a soil food web. A food web is basically a makeup of a bunch of different types of animals or organisms, and they're all feeding into each other. And so we have plants up at the top, right, that are photosynthesizing, which means they're taking in sunlight and they're producing sugars. And when those plants decompose, all these animals get to circulate those nutrients around the soil. And this is a way that we can manage for nutrients and water without having to add as many to our croplands and without having to water so much. So what do these guys eat? Well, they eat decaying litter, which is basically like, you know, any of these plants that fell on the soil surface. You know, there might be a beetle that's eating away on some little grass blades. And maybe when that beetle dies, there's going to be something else in here that's going to eat that beetle. But eventually, those nutrients that were once in the plant are going to be recycled in the soil. And that's what I'm really, really interested in. And why do these guys matter? Because, like I said, they recycle nutrients, and they can protect against pests and disease. Can anybody think of what happens if maybe like an invader comes in here?
What's an invader?
An invader, like let's say a beetle that wants to eat this plant. What happens if he comes in and there's already a beetle here? maybe those two would fight it off, and maybe you could drive away some pests. So that's one hope that we have with this. And they also can help the soil hold water. There's something called soil carbon, which is a really hot topic these days. And soil carbon is the currency of all this life under the soil, right? So soil carbon is feeding these organisms, and it's also holding water and holding nutrients in the soil. So basically, can we manage farmlands in a way that we are prioritizing the soil food web and trying to store water and store nutrients so that we don't have to apply so much to our croplands? That's the question I have.
If you bring an invasive eel to a place,
Yes.
somewhere, wherever, and there's already an eel there, they might fight it out, but what if they make a different species that either attacks or helps?
Exactly. So this is a really interesting question, right? And that's something that a lot of researchers who are in my field will work on things like that. They'll maybe have a little trial where they bring in an invader beetle and see what gets fought off. And what happens is when they found that when you have a healthy soil food web, when you have tons of different animals already there, the scary thing doesn't happen. Usually the invader gets driven off because this community is already healthy and it's not going to be invaded. But a lot of scientists are asking that exact same question, so that's a really good thought. And if anybody has any questions throughout, feel free to shout them out, raise your hand, whatever you need.
If you want to
Oh,
give
nice.
them the microphone, just flip it
Perfect.
on to talk off to not.
Thank you, thank you. So what this comes down to is that farm sustainability depends on how we use biology to supply crops with water and nutrients. So sustainability really means that you can do something for a long time and it's not going to break down, right? Making sure that we can farm this land for a long time without having the crop yields get too low or something is really what we're interested in. So this is an example with at Kellogg Biological Station, which is a place in Michigan that I do a lot of research at. And on this side, they're not prioritizing the soil food web. So they don't grow anything off season. And you could probably imagine that under this soil, there's not too much life, right? If it's so brown and crusty on top, it's probably not so healthy underneath. Whereas on this side, they're growing an overwintering crop that I'll talk about later. And that's really, really interesting because when that living matter is on top of the soil, that means it can feed the soil food web and cycle these nutrients more easily. So this is my parents' farm. That's my mom. And we grow a lot of things. So this is part of our orchard. We have strawberries in the foreground, and she's looking out at some blackberries. We have some fruit trees in the back, and we also have a lot of cattle. We have 250 cows, which is pretty crazy. And so I have a question for you guys. How could we figure out if this is a sustainable farm? Does anybody have any ideas on what we could measure? Yeah.
I guess you could measure the area.
Yes, exactly. What's your name? Mackenzie. Okay, Mackenzie asked or gave a great point that you could measure how much fruit is being produced. You could measure how many blueberries you're getting from the field. That's called yield, and that's something that a lot of farmers look at. That's a great one. Do you have one?
You could measure some carrots.
You could measure some carrots, exactly. How would you measure them? Would you count how many there are or how big they are? Do you have any ideas?
See how big.
Okay, yeah, that would be a great metric.
Get some ladybugs.
Thanks.
No. Get some ladybugs and put them where the aphids mostly.
Yes, exactly. That's also great. So that could be a cool field experiment, right, where you maybe put some aphids and some ladybugs together and see what happens. So I'm really obsessed with soil. So I really like what's going on underground. So there's tons of researchers who are doing all these things that you guys are talking about. And what I do is all under the ground. So I like to measure what's going on down there, right? And how can that change how we farm? So if you were to grab some soil, you could see this is kind of the profile that's going on under the ground. So you've got plenty of roots, you've got nutrients, you've got all types of grubs and microbes and all those soil food organisms that I was showing you before. And so this is just one way to measure farming systems, but this is the way that I find to be really, really interesting. And so this is a photo of me in California where I did my past research. And this, does anybody know what I'm holding here? Dirt, exactly, exactly. So that's me just spending way too many days out in the field just collecting soil to understand how it's changing with different management types, like I was talking about before. And can anybody think of what type of farm this is? What are they growing? What do you think, Mackenzie? A food farm, yes, exactly. Any other specific guesses? Yeah?
Cows, so then you can get the milk and sell the milk or get meat.
Yes. What's your name? Luke. Great job, Luke. Yes, you're right.
Homeschooled, so I'm learning about more animals.
I love it. Well, welcome here. This is what I was studying was cows on this system. They weren't dairy cows, so we're not milking them, but they were for beef. And this was the lab that I worked in Berkeley, California. And the main theme of the lab, I know it's kind of a lot of big words here, but our question is, how can reliance on biodiversity and ecological processes create productive, resilient, and healthy agricultural systems? So basically what that's saying is, how can we rely on the soil food web to recycle nutrients instead of applying so many nutrients on top of the soil? And so I really wanted to come back to the Midwest because I grew up in Ann Arbor. I'm really interested in farmlands here, and we have a really interesting history of our farmlands in the Midwest. So this is a map of the Midwestern states, which grow mainly corn and soybeans. And you can see on the left, this is land use change. So the more blue that map is in different areas, the higher cropland density in the future, basically. So the blue areas now are totally farmland, and maybe 100 years ago, they weren't farmland at all. And so you can see some city centers here, like Chicago right here. That is, obviously not farmland, and so it hasn't changed as much. But those blue areas are now completely farms, and alongside that, you can also see that there's a soil carbon deficit, which means the amount of soil carbon has been decreasing, and it pretty much lines up. Decreasing is like going down. So it's leaving the soil. And like I talked about before, soil carbon is good for holding nutrients and holding water. So it's something that is really important to us, especially as farmers who are trying to grow good food. So I'm really interested in the Midwestern agricultural system, and that's where I do most of my work. And I'll just give you guys a quick demo of the past research that I've done in the past few years. So my parents have a farm, and they used to grow corn and soybean, which looks like the left. And about 6 years ago or 7 years ago, they brought cows onto the farm. And they decided we're not going to grow corn and soybean, and instead we're going to raise cattle. And so these two photos were taken on the same day. And this is just our neighbor's field that's still growing corn and soy. And this is our cropland that's now converted to pasture. So I was really interested in how are the soil carbon changing when you change these management types, right? So what happens if we convert conventional cornfields to grazed pasture for a short period of time? And the question really comes from how can we farm more sustainably, right? How can we bring more soil carbon into these systems where we know it's been leached out? So this is a little video, and we'll see if it'll play, of the cattle. They're really cute. And there's birds flying around, and I spend a lot of time with them every summer and winter. And so one thing that I measured on this field was the microbial biomass, which basically means this is the amount of soil organisms that are present. So if you had a piece of soil that had 0 things living in it, this microbial biomass would be 0. And if you had so much life in there, then this would be a really high number. And so I took samples from our fields and from neighboring farms that were still doing the normal corn soybean thing. And these green bars represent the pasture land, and the blue bars represent the cropland. So you can see that more than double microbial biomass occurs in all of these pasture systems, which is really good news for me, because that's what I was thinking, sort of, that we could maybe restore some life to the soil if we bring, more sustainable practices back to the land. Yes?
Okay, does this, I don't fully know how to ask this.
Please, just
Thank you.
Not really, if that's okay.
Yes.
and then stripping the land.
Totally.
And, okay.
Yeah, so like
The link.
the reason that most of these croplands are profitable, so like this on the left, the reason that they're profitable is because the government gives out subsidies to farmers who are growing those commodity crops. And so they will buy fertilizer at a discounted rate, and they can usually have, you know, in Michigan you have free water for the most part, and then they sell their crops, and basically the government is funding that sale. And so this system is profitable right now for farmers, as in farmers are making money from it, but the money is mostly coming from the government. And so that's a big question in my research is if we can make these sustainable systems profitable. Because when you think about the word sustainability, it means that something is going to last for a long time. And if people are living on the land and they can't make a living from their farming, then that's not true sustainability to me.
This is stripping.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
So fascinating.
Yes, I love that you like it.
Implications of this.
Yes.
Mind-blowing.
Yes, huge. And so then I was talking about soil carbon before, which I know for younger people you might not have heard about this as much, but this is a really big topic in the news all the time these days, is talking about soil carbon. And basically, on this pasture land, we put cattle there for 5 years, and then I took these samples. So this has only been treated like this for 5 years, and there was already a 13% increase in total organic carbon stocks on the cropland. And so that's good for things like climate change mitigation, but it's also good because that soil carbon stores nutrients and water, which is really good for sustainable farming in the future. So this result to me was really, really interesting. And after I did this project, I decided to come to University of Michigan to continue my research in the same type of system. And so getting back to this point on economics, my next research question, which is my PhD dissertation, is can we grow cash crops like corn and soybean and produce animal protein, so having either beef cattle or dairy cattle on the same land base while also building back soil health and doing this soil carbon thing? And so if we had all of our farms looking like this, that might be great for the soil carbon, but we have to eat things other than just beef and milk, right? We need to produce more things. And so my question is, can we do both, basically? And nobody really knows yet. And so that's where I'm going with it. And I'll just introduce a brief topic of something called cover crops. So most corn and soybean farms, this is like residue from the last year's corn. Usually these just are left barren all winter long in Michigan and all over the Midwest. That's common practice. But you can seed in a cover crop, which is a crop that you grow over the winter, but it's never really harvested. So it's basically just there like to protect the soil. If you can imagine rain falling on this, it's probably going to hit those plants and slowly percolate into the soil. Whereas if a big rainstorm hit just a barren piece of land, a lot of soil and nutrients might run off. So my lab specifically works with cover crops to understand how they benefit the soil and why we should use them, and if we should incentivize farmers to grow these crops. And what I'm interested in, and this is a very maybe complex figure, but I'll walk you through it a little bit, is grazing those cover crops. So what if you could grow corn and soybean over the normal growing period, and then plant in your cover crop, and then bring cattle through it over the winter periodically to graze that cover crop? So you might be more profitable because now over the winter you're actually providing some feed for cattle, but also their manure is a really, really good source of nutrients, and manure is pretty much known to build soil carbon really quickly. So what I'm interested in, on this part of the screen you can see this is what it would look like if you were just growing that cover crop over the winter, and this is what it looks like if you were also to graze it. So additionally you have some manure piles, and basically that's just going to kickstart the soil health of this entire system. And so my next phase of this project is recruiting farmers. And so I have 8 farms I'm working with right now all over Michigan, and they're going to do this for me. So they're going to grow a cover crop that looks just like this over the winter, and then their neighbors who have cattle are going to come on in the winter and graze this field. And I'm going to do that on 8 different farms across Michigan. And then I'm going to test the soil before and during and after to see how changes are happening throughout that period. So it's a big idea, and it's going to take probably 5 years of my life. But I'm really committed to it because I think improving sustainability for farmers, both economically and environmentally, is something that I feel really passionately about, and I think that the USDA and other organizations should also feel passionately about. And so having really clear research on this, I think, is really, really important. That's most of my spiel. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. Yes.
Sure. I don't really know the answer to this, but I know that for a period of time in U.S. history, there was a lot of crop rotation. Did that sort of stop with the onset of chemical fertilizers?
Yeah.
So that's what created a lot of the problem.
For the most part. So we call that in our field the Green Revolution. And that's basically all this research that was funded by the war helped to bring really cheap chemicals onto croplands.
Okay.
And so there's still some rotation. So like a lot of these fields do corn and soybean and then wheat, and then they go back to corn again.
But does that replenish the?
No,
not
it's
so
it's
much,
mainly
I guess.
for yield. It's so that, you know, when the corn comes back around, it'll grow bigger because it's not taking the same nutrients out every time. But the bigger problem is that those practices come with a ton of application of fertilizer.
Right.
The fertilizer is really cheap for the most part, and they also till the soil to just make things easier for them.
Yep.
But all those practices that were basically funded by research in like 1940 are all still happening today.
Got it. And then the second question is that you hear a lot about cattle and the problem of cattle for the environment, and what's the balance between cattle helping the soil
Totally.
and hurting the carbon emissions?
Yeah, I think with sustainability, there's a big, almost everyone wants an easy answer. This is good or this is bad. And with cattle, the way that most cattle are raised in the United States is really, really bad. It's really, really bad. It's good. It's bad for the environment, and it's, you know, there's this whole sector of feedlots and things that are just truly unsustainable. But there's some really good regenerative ranching happening. And so if you think about it, by necessity, like cattle come through a field and they digest plant matter, which not many things can do, and immediately within 24 hours turn it into fertilizer that's plant available. So it's like a magical composting machine to me, but you have to manage them well. So if you have manure piling up somewhere, that creates emissions. And, you know, that's one other thing that I like to think about too, is that all food we produce has some emissions associated with it. There's an often misnomer that if you're growing vegetables, like a strawberry is like, oh, that's perfect because it's a fruit. And I think if you ever go to a strawberry farm in California, it's totally barren and it's just like hot sun baking the soil, and it's not as sustainable as you think. So I was vegetarian for 12 years because of these things. And then in California, I met a lot of ranchers who were doing really, really beautiful work, and changed my view on it. But it's both and, right? It's still very bad, and it can be good. Yeah. If we say it's not the cow, it's the how. That's like the slogan. Yeah. Yeah. Can you eat the carrots? Yes. Oh my God, that's such a good question. So just really quickly, you can eat food from sustainable farms right here in Ann Arbor. So these carrots, which I would love for you to come up and try, are from White Lotus Farms in Ann Arbor. And these carrots are grown while building soil health. So the way that these farmers right here bring nutrients into their system is by growing things like cover crops. They have sheep on their farm that are grazing, and there's manure that's releasing nutrients. And they do things really sustainably. And you can also taste it. These carrots are so sweet, baby, perfect. They're great. And yeah, so I welcome you guys to come up and grab a carrot, and I want you to snap it off yourself because it's really satisfying, and you should know where your food comes from. Yes, of course. Thank you guys for being here. Hey, Chris. Oh my God. Please, yeah, just go up there and just snap one off. I know it's a hard decision.